Today we have issued our annual report, which for 2015, and this is, I believe, on our website. So for those of you who want access to it, it's immediately available on the internet. The physical copies may take a few days to be printed. I just printed the first 4 or 5 copies and handed them over to...
We have copies already.
You got copies, excellent.
No. Will be distributed
Afterwards, okay. So they have copies for you, which will be ready soon after the meeting. I presented our copies officially to the President, Honorable Prime Minister and Honorable Minister of Finance today. So we'll start with a presentation by the Assistant Governor in charge of Economic Research, Mr. Siriwardana, who will run you through the basic contents of the annual report. And thereafter we can open it up for discussion. So I'll hand over to Mr. Siriwardana.
Thank you, Governor. Good evening. I will start with the statutory requirement of the publication of the Central Bank Annual Report. As you may know, according to the Section 35 of the Monetary Law Act, we have to submit a report within 4 months after the end of each financial year to the Ministry of Finance, giving details of the basically conditions of the central bank and a review of the policies and measures adopted by the Monetary Board during that financial year, and also giving analysis on economic as well as financial circumstances which prompted those policies and measures. So that's the background. And this contains basically 4 parts: state of the economy and its performance, policies and issues. And the second one contains with the accounts and operations of the central bank. And the third one is the major administrative measures adopted by the Monetary Board in particular year, that is 2015. And part 4 is the major legislative enactments of 2015. And in addition to that, we have added an appendix with tables, a number of tables, and also a special appendix giving 50 or more years of data for the convenience of the readers. So this is the part 1 structure. You can see there are 8 chapters in this part 1, basically highlighting the economic price and finance system stability. And the second one is the national output and expenditure. Third is the economic and social infrastructure, prices, wages, and employment product, which is the 4th one. And the chapter 5 covers this external sector development and policies. And we have also covered the fiscal policy and government finance in chapter 6. And chapter 7 covers the monetary policy, money, credit, and interest rates. And the final chapter is about the financial sector development and system stability. And to give you some highlights of the economy, in fact, very briefly, we have given in the real sector as well as inflation. You saw the economy grow in 2015 by 4.8%, and now Sri Lanka is a 82 billion economy, US dollars, and per capita income has increased to 3,924. And we saw headline inflation remain around mid-single digits, but at the same time, we had the concern which was there in the relatively rising core inflation gradually. And these are basically highlights in the 3 sectors of the economy. I'm not going to go into the details. We have, in fact, issued a press release, and also you will be getting the copy of the annual report, so you can just go through the details. But I will highlight that the services sector grew by 5.3%, and industry sector grew by 3%, and agriculture, forest, and fishing sector grew by 5.5%. So all 3 sectors have contributed to this 4.8% growth in 2015. And in the monetary policy and the monetary sector, we saw highlights like this, especially the credit to private sector increased by 25%, which amounts to about 691 billion. And net credit to government expanded to 325 billion, in fact, exceeding the budgeted target. And broad-money growth also accelerated by growing at 17.8%. And at the same time, you already know, central bank started gradual tightening of the monetary policy towards the end of the last year. And in the external sector, we saw trade deficit expanding by 8.4 billion. And there was a slowdown in foreign exchange inflows, especially to the balance of payment. And there also was increased outflows from the government securities market particularly. And this deteriorated the external situation in 2015. As a result, we recorded an overall balance of payment deficit of 1.4 billion during 2015. Towards the end of the year, and in fact, since September, we started, in fact, we allowed the greater flexibility of the exchange rate determination in the market. And moving into the fiscal sector, the budget deficit was 7.4% of GDP in 2015. We saw increase in revenue, but at the same time, expenditure increased at a relatively higher rate. So that's the reason to basically record a higher deficit in 2015. And government debt, of the central government debt, recorded at 76% of GDP in 2016. Moving into the financial sector, we saw finance system remained stable, and business operations from the banking sector expanded, and total assets and asset quality of the banking sector improved, and at the same time, capital of the banking sector was maintained at a healthy level. So those are the highlights of the main sectors of the economy, and we have also discussed about the medium-term outlook of the economy. We have indicated that we expect the Sri Lankan economy to grow by 5.8% in 2016 and move into a relatively higher rate thereafter. In the external sector, we expect a positive development as a result of the development that we expect in the domestic as well as global economies. And fiscal sector, government is committed to reduce the budget deficit by 3.5% of GDP by 2020. And in line with that, the debt to GDP ratio is also expected to be reduced to 60% by 2020. In the monetary sector, we will be focusing on maintaining inflation in mid-single digit levels in the conduct of monetary policy, while facilitating the economy to realize its growth potential. And another key feature of this year's annual report is the inclusion of 16 box articles. I have given some of the highlights of these box articles. This also will be available to you, so you can just go through this. And I will go through one by one very quickly. One is the fiscal space for stability and resilience. We have highlighted the importance of having a fiscal space in the government budget in order to accommodate the pressing needs of the country. And second one, the socio-economic challenges and poverty, income inequality, and child undernutrition in Sri Lanka. This is also one topic that we wanted to highlight about the remaining facets of poverty, especially in the regional peripheral districts, and also the issues related to income inequality, and also the child undernutrition, which also has been highlighted in this box article. And the other one is the business condition survey as a signal of business sentiment. This contains business outlook survey results and also the purchasing managers index, which enable the policymakers to gather real-time information about the economy in a timely and more forward-looking manner. So we have given the information and some of the results in that as well. And another one is the renewable energy for electricity generation. We know the importance of improving renewable energy in the economy, so we have highlighted the importance of that, and at the same time, we have given some policy measures to be adopted going forward. And the other one also, we have highlighted the importance of non-state sector participation in providing higher education in Sri Lanka. We know the access to higher education is very limited in Sri Lanka, so as a result, we have highlighted the importance of providing stimulus or various encouragement to non-state sector participation in the provision of higher education sector in Sri Lanka. And at the same time, we have highlighted in a box article about Sustainable Development Goals. In September last year, world leaders gathered and they came up with the new Sustainable Development Goals after the Millennium Development Goals. So we have highlighted the key features of these Sustainable Development Goals in one of the box articles. And the other one is the National Consumer Price Index for Sri Lanka, which was introduced last year. We have given highlights of that as well. And another box article talks about the tourism industry, prospects and challenges. We have discussed so far the achievements of this sector and also the potential that we have going forward, and also the challenges that we are having in order to basically get the maximum potential and harness the maximum potential of this sector. And the other one is another key issue that the economy is going to be faced, population aging, the challenges as well as the way forward. We have highlighted the issues and also the challenges, and we have suggested some of the measures that to be taken by the government and the authorities in order to face this situation going forward. And also, we have included another one, modification to the monetary policy framework in Sri Lanka. As perhaps you know, that we have been basically operating the monetary policy through a monetary targeting framework, but now we are gradually moving to a flexible inflation targeting framework. So we have first time announced that we can go through this and get an idea about our new operation methodology of the monetary policy implementation. And then the cyber risk management in banks. This is also one of the very important banks, especially after this Bangladesh bank situation. So we have highlighted the various risks that the industries are facing, especially, and the measures that could be taken in order to manage the cyber risk in banks. And then the new regulatory and supervisory approaches in ensuring the safety of soundness of banks. This is also one of the very important areas where we have highlighted, especially the central bank's roles as well as the other areas that could be paid the attention. And the other one is the main finding of the survey of microcredits. There we have given the results of the surveys that has been conducted by the central bank, so you can get information about these various areas where the microfinance is basically directed. And at the same time, implementation of risk-based approach in anti-money laundering and countering of financing of terrorism. This is also one of the very important areas where the central bank is also monitoring, and at the same time, going forward, it's going to be a very important area. So we have highlighted some of the key issues in that area as well. And then, as usual, we have incorporated major economic policy changes and measures in 2015. This includes all the basically key measures in the 4 sectors of the economy that the government and the central bank implemented during 2015. And the last one is the new risk management framework of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which the central bank has basically introduced in order to manage the risks. And the annual report also highlights several issues and challenges faced by the Sri Lankan economy, which need urgent attention by the authorities. It is expected that with the appropriate policies, the economy will return to a high growth path in the medium term. So to summarize these issues and policies, we have very clearly indicated the necessity of improving fiscal performance through essential reforms. You know the importance of increasing revenue, and reduction of expenditure, and maintenance of public debt, the deficit at a sustainable level, and also the reduction of the importance of reducing the government debt going forward. That we have highlighted, and at the same time, to complement that, the importance of reforms in the state-owned enterprises. We have very clearly highlighted the importance of implementing these reforms in the SOEs, and then the importance of attracting non-debt creating FDI and long-term financial flows. That is also one of the areas that we have highlighted in this report. And then the importance of strengthening external sector sustainability through external trade. You know, we are facing with the trade deficit, and we have discussed here the importance of improving external trade and whatever the policies that the government and the other stakeholders would be able to basically implement going forward. And at the same time, we have included discussion on the optimal utilization of trade agreements, available trade agreements, and other new arrangements that are going to be taken place. And importance of having proactive policies for inclusive growth also have been highlighted. And then the need for basically improving the quality of human capital needs, that also we have highlighted very clearly. And at the same time, evaluation of the current education system and the need for improving it also we have highlighted. And one of the key areas that we are basically hearing these days is the chronic kidney disease of unknown origin. So that also we have taken as an issue, as a national issue, and we have highlighted the importance of taking appropriate policy measures to face this. And improvement of the public transport, especially the mass transportation, to reduce the basically costs of the country, we have highlighted. And at the same time, again, as I indicated, development of renewable energy that we have highlighted here. And at the same time, introduction of the robust pricing formula, especially to cost-reflective prices, price formula to petroleum products and other public utilities. That also we have highlighted. And at the same time, the issues in the agriculture sector as well as the plantation sector, those we have highlighted here. And at the same time, promotion of public-private partnership as an alternative for debt financing also we have highlighted in our report. And then the sustainability of pension and superannuation schemes, especially while strengthening the government pension schemes, we have highlighted the importance of introduction of private sector superannuation schemes to ensure a better life for the elderly people going forward. And at the same time, importance of enhancing financial deepening and exploring the potential of the strategic location of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. And going forward, what would be the basically important policies that the country should implement in order to get the maximum benefit through this locational advantage. That also we have highlighted. So finally, we have seen the strong need for decisive steps. We have specifically highlighted that the year 2015 highlighted the structural vulnerabilities of the economy that had built over time. And we have indicated decisive steps are necessary to correct these vulnerabilities to ensure the country's progress, along with a high growth, low inflation path. Finally, we have indicated building external and domestic policy buffers is of paramount importance to sustain a robust growth trajectory over the medium to long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahinda. Distribute those copies now, or where are they? They're outside, okay. If you're raring to get one of them, please step outside. But in the meantime, we had our regular monetary policy meeting today at the Monetary Board, and we have decided to keep policy unchanged. I think you probably have received the press release by now. So you may have some questions on this, but basically our view was that inflation, particularly core inflation, which had peaked at about 5.7% in February, came off a little bit in March, which is unusual given that April is the New Year season and there's a lot of strong demand in the market during that period. It was interesting that in March we actually saw inflation coming off a bit. So core inflation dropped about 4.5%. It's too early to say whether this is a direct result of the monetary tightening policies which we commenced in January. You may remember we raised the statutory reserve ratio for banks, and then we raised the repurchase and the reverse repurchase rates in the markets. So that may have also curtailed some demand in the economy, though it must be said that the demand for credit is still strong. Bank lending is still strong, growing at over 20% on an annualized basis. So, as I think I told those of you who came to our last press conference a short while ago, there's a lot of evidence that economic activity has picked up substantially. Last year, the growth of bank credit to all borrowers was 3 times larger than what it was in 2014. And that trend continues till now, till the end of March. We find that bank credit is still growing quite robustly. We'll have to watch how that impacts inflation. So the Monetary Board will keep an open mind on whether we should continue tightening monetary policy or whether we should stay at the current level. Remember that monetary policy is not too tight at the moment. In fact, the rate hike of 50 basis points that we implemented a few months ago was basically a reversion to the rates that applied before the rate cut in March 2015. So, in fact, we are probably still at a fairly accommodative monetary policy context. Going forward, there are several issues that we have to look at. How will the exchange rate perform? Now, the currency has stopped depreciating like it did last year because the US dollar in particular has stopped strengthening globally. And at the same time, we have seen a resumption of capital inflows into our markets, our financial markets. I think in April, we recorded positive inflows into the bond markets. So there are some positive signs out there. From a real economy perspective, we saw electricity consumption, for instance, is registering record levels of demand. In February, which is the last data that I saw, the electricity consumption was the highest on record for any month in the country, despite these occasional blackouts and such like. So that's quite interesting. Tourist arrivals are growing at over 25% annualized. So these are, and this along with the growth in bank credit, I think shows that the underlying economy is quite robust. On the, I was looking at the note, the printing of notes and the issue of coins, new coins and notes by the central bank. And in the month of March, we have issued a record 86 billion worth of notes and coins. That compares with about 55 billion in March 2015 and about 44 billion in March 2014. Sorry, March 2014 was 44, March 2015 was about 55, and this year it was 86 billion. So you can see that the demand for currency is very strong this new year. So I think all this points out to an underlying resurgence. Nevertheless, we have to be conscious of the fact that our exports are still weak. Tea and rubber prices are down. And even our garment exports are flat to slightly negative. A little bit of good news on the remittances side. As you know, last year remittances from Sri Lankans working overseas dipped slightly. In the first 2 months of this year, they are up 8%. So to me, that indicates that the Middle East in particular, where oil prices have more than doubled, oil prices fell to $20 a barrel, now they're about over $40 a barrel. That may have improved confidence in the Middle East, and therefore our workers are probably sending back more remittances to Sri Lanka. And remittances are a big deal for our economy. They were about $7 billion last year. And if they grow at 8% or more this year, they could rise to a higher level. So all in all, I would say there are some positive aspects of the economy, which are particularly the domestic economy, tourism, domestic consumption, agriculture, volumes are doing well. On the side of concern, we must look at how our exports perform going forward. For that, we've obviously kept a competitive currency. The rupee is now freely floating. And to the extent that bank credit is growing very strongly, we have to see that this does not spill over into inflation. So the central bank will tighten policy if and when we find that inflationary pressure is getting out of control. But for the time being, it seems well anchored. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The budget deficit was mentioned as 6.2% a few weeks ago when I was here, and now it was mentioned as 7.4%. Can you explain how it changed in a few weeks?
I'm not sure that I remember the 6.2 number, but Mahinda, would you like to elaborate on that? In the annual report, we have put it out as 7.4, right?
Perhaps I'm not sure whether we indicated that number in 2 weeks before, but during last many weeks, basically tentatively also, we have been working with this 7.4% number. So that eventually was the final number of the budget deficit.
And how much does that compare with 2014?
It was 5.7% of GDP in 2014.
Also, GDP growth was forecast at 5 to 5.5% for this year a few weeks ago, but now it's seen at 5.8%. Can you explain the difference?
You want to take that?
The GDP, when you forecast the GDP, obviously the GDP projection is always different from the actuals. I mean, that's why when you have new information, we always revise even the projection. If you can remember, even the IMF World Bank, IMF now several times revised their projections downwards going forward, even about 2 weeks ago. Likewise, I think the projection we had based on the information we at that time would always be subject to revision. That's why it's a continuous process, and we may also reverse upwards if we see, as Kavan mentioned, the higher credit growth or some positive news, then we may reverse it upwards. So that all depends on the information available at that point of time, and then if we have any information, we obviously revise it. So here the two numbers are, earlier number was a projection, now what we have is actual for 2015. That has been, this is a final number basically.
Governor, at the start of this presentation, it was mentioned that the central bank should submit its annual report within 4 months, is it? But now I think it's past 4 months. Just to clarify on the Monetary Law Act.
No, the Monetary Law Act says that by the 30th of April, we should present it to the Honorable Minister of Finance. No?
Within 4 months.
Within 4 months,
Within 4
yeah.
months,
So it's
30th
within that 4 months, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Governor, how concerned are you on the BOP position now? I mean, there was kind of an issue that, BOP was, we are facing a kind of a crisis. How an issue, right?
Yeah.
So how close are we for a BOP crisis, or has the country averted already?
No, look, we were never in a crisis. The point is that our imports last year were quite robust, and exports did not perform that well. Exports, contracted by about 5% because of low tea rubber prices, and at the same time, remittances being flat, essentially, and textile garment exports also were, slightly negative. But on the other hand, imports, particularly of cars, surged, and that's why, and there were also outflows of capital. Foreign money was leaving our bond market and our equity market last year, mainly because of international turbulence and also the fact that the dollar was getting stronger against all emerging market currencies, and investors were basically deserting the emerging markets. Now this year, those trends, some of them seem to be improving. Import growth has become much more subdued. That, I would say, is a direct result of the exchange rate flexibility that we introduced in September. So to the extent that it's more expensive to import goods, people are probably, curbing a little bit of restraining their appetite for imports. And hopefully that is also spurring domestic production of goods and services, which can replace or substitute those imports to some extent. The worry is that exports are still not picking up steam. Part of that is beyond our control. Tea and rubber prices, are slumping worldwide, and we can't really influence that because we are not market makers in those commodities. In terms of garments, again, without the benefit of the GSP Plus, it's difficult for us to compete against Vietnam and such like in the European market. To the extent that the US market is picking up, we have a reasonable performance there. So I would say that, the balance of payments weakness has to be looked at from a exports perspective. And there, it's not just us alone. Our exports fell by 5% last year, whereas lots of other countries, including Singapore, India, etc., have seen much larger falls in their exports. As a percentage, on a percentage basis. So, Sri Lanka's experience is not significantly different from what other countries are facing right now in the emerging world. Yes, our reserves could probably be stronger than where they are. We started with a low reserve level last year, 4 months of imports or so. We managed to sort of keep that. Maybe it slid a little bit since then because we've had to repay debts that were coming due. But in the meantime, as you know, we've been talking to the IMF, and once these IMF negotiations are concluded, which I hope will be soon, then, we can re-enter the markets and borrow a little money, and at the same time have the benefit of cheaper funding from the IMF, the World Bank, the ADB, and several bilateral donors. So I think the outlook for the balance of payments was never in a crisis situation. We've always maintained close to 4 months of imports or thereabouts. And that, I think, is quite substantial. I think over 3 months of imports, I think, is adequate. Going forward, we intend to build on that. But the key thing is, Sri Lanka has seen an erosion in our export performance. From 30% of GDP a little over a decade ago, our exports are now down to 14% of GDP, which, is simply not enough. We have to grow that. we have to see that the economy becomes much more export-oriented. And that's why you have seen that the Honorable Prime Minister has been speaking about entering into free trade agreements with several countries, such as Singapore, China, etc. Even Turkey is interested in negotiating a free trade deal with us. All that will improve our trade and then, improve our overall competitiveness of our industries and our exports. That really is the big challenge for Sri Lanka, I think, in the future.
Governor, can you elaborate what happened during the IMF negotiation in Washington?
I'll hand it over to Dr. Veerasinghe, who was heavily involved in those negotiations.
We basically, on the technical level, we have sort of come to an agreement on the fiscal, monetary, and structural reforms. And it's now continue discussion even while we were in DC to finalize the technical details of the what we call technical memorandum of understanding. We are fine-tune the language that we still negotiate. I think hopefully we should be able to finalize it within, I think, if not couple of days, probably within this week. So I think we are very hopeful that we will have a staff level, like what we call staff level agreement pretty soon. And once we have that, then there will be announcement by the IMF, okay, we have come to this kind of staff level agreement. And then they will announce, okay, this, after some time there's a formal procedure to be followed internally by the IMF, before it goes to the board. Then they have to circulate these papers within the members, and then it's just a formal procedure that they have to follow between the staff level agreement and the date of the board approval. So from that point, we will start getting the disbursement. So once we have that information, certainly we will release more. Right now, I think because we are still not come to final staff level agreements, it's difficult for us to discuss what it is contained basically right now.
So is it fair to say that within this week staff level agreement will be finalized?
I think I can't say exact dates. We are very close to reaching an agreement. That I can say.
The value of the loan, has there been an agreement on that?
That's also been discussed. I think then it will be announced. So once we reach an agreement.
Dr. Veerasinghe, අපනයන වලට ගෙවීම් ලබා ගැනීම සම්බන්ධයෙන් නව නීතියක් ගිය සතියේදී නිවේදනය කරලා තිබ්බා. එයි මෙවැනි තීරණයක් ගන්න හේතු වුණේ?
ඒක අත් වශයෙන්ම දැන් ඒ අපනයන සඳහා මුදල් ලංකාවට ගෙනීමේ කියන එක විනිමය පාලනය යටතේ ඒ ගෙන ආපු මේ නීතියක්. බැලුවොත් දැන් විනිමය පාලන කටයුතු වල ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන්ම බලතල තියෙන්නේ මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශයට. එතකොට අපි කරන්නේ මහ බැංකුව විසින් කරන්නේ මේක ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීම තමයි. එතකොට මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශය තීරණය කරන් තියෙනවා මේ ඒ පිටරට යවන අපනයන අයගේ මුදල් යම්කිසි ආකාරයක කාලයක් තුල නැවත ලංකාවේ බැංකුව වලට ලංකාව බැංකු ක්‍රමය තුලට ගේන්න ඕන කියන එක. ඉතින් එතෙන්දී බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ අර දැන් ඒ විදේශ විනිමය උපයන විදේශයෙන් මේ අපනයන බඩු භාණ්ඩ අපනයන කරන අය එක්ක මාස 3ක් නැත්නම් දවස් 120ක් වගේ ඒ කාලයක් ඇතුළත බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා මේ මුදල් ලංකාවේ බැංකු ක්‍රමයට ගෙනල්ලා එතෙන්දී අපේ බැංකු ක්‍රමය තුල මුදල් සංසරණය පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන් කියන වෙන එක තමයි ඒකේ අදහස. ඉතින් ඒකෙදි මම දකින්න ලොකු ප්‍රශ්නයක් මොකද ඒකේ දැන් මීට මාස කිහිපයකට කලින් අපි මේ අර තිබිච්ච රෙස්ට්‍රික්ෂන් එක මේ අඩු කරා. කියන්නේ තිබිච්ච කලින් තුව සීමාවක් තමයි විදේශ විනිමය උපයන කෙනෙක්ගේ විදේශ විනිමය ගිණුමක් ලංකාවේ බැංකුව තියෙනවා නම් එතකොට ඒ ගිණුමෙන් ඕනම වෙලාවක ඕනම කාරණයකට මුදල් ගෙනියන්න කලින් බැරුව තිබුණා. අපි ඒක දැන් නිදහස් කරා. මතකයි අපි ප්‍රෙස් කන්ෆරන්ස් තියෙන වෙලාව කිව්වා. එතකොට එක්ස්පෝර්ටර් කෙනෙක්ට ඒ මුදල් පිටරට ගිණුමක තිබුණාට ලංකාවේ ගිණුමක තිබුණාත් දැන් වෙනසක් නැහැ. මොකද ඒක පිටරට ගිණුමක තියාගන්න හේතුව බොහෝ වෙලාවට ඒගොල්ලෝ හිතනවා මේ ගෙනාවත් මේ ගෙනියන්න බෑ වෙයි කියලා මොන හරි අවශ්‍යතාවයකට. නමුත් දැන් ඒ නිදහස අපි ඒක නිදහස් කරලා නෙදින්නේ. එතකොට මේක තියෙන්නේ මොන බැංකුවේද කියන එක ඒතරම්ම ප්‍රශ්නයක් නෙවෙයි. මම දකින්න විදිහට එක්ස්පෝර්ට් කෙනෙක්ගේ පැත්තෙන් බැලුවම. ඉතින් ඒක අනිත් ඒකේ තියෙන හොඳ පැත්ත තමයි එහෙම ගෙනාවට පස්සේ ලංකාවේ බැංකුව වලට ඒ මුදල් පාවිච්චි කරන්න පුළුවන් අවස්ථාවක් ලැබෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒක තමයි මම හිතන්නේ ප්‍රධාන වශයෙන් මුදල් අමාත්‍යාංශය මගේ තීරණය කළා තියෙන ඒ බැංකු පද්ධතිය ලංකාවේ බැංකු පද්ධතිය තුළත තියෙන විදේශ විනිමය සංසරණය වැඩි කිරීම තමයි ඒකෙන් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ. අතරම එක්ස්පෝර්ට්ලාට ඒක දෙන බාධා වයින් කරනවා. ඒගොල්ලන්ට ඕනලාගේ අවශ්‍ය නම් ඒ මුදල් ගෙනියන්න පුළුවන්. අපි කියන්නේ මේක ගෙනල්ලා රුපියල් වලට කන්වර්ට් කරලා කරන්න ඕන කියන එක නෙවෙයි. මේ මුදල් ලංකාවේ බැංකු පද්ධතිය තුළ තියාගැනීම තමයි ඒකේ පරමාර්ථය වෙලා තියෙන්නේ.
අදාළ කාල සීමාව ඇතුළතදී එහෙම මුදල් ගේන්න බැරි කමක් වුණොත් මොකද්ද ගන්න පියවර?
ඒකට අර තියෙනවා දැන් එහෙම නීතියක් ගෙනාවට පස්සේ ඒ කාලය තුල ගෙන දැන් කලිනුත් තිබුණේ අර බැංකුවකින් ණයක් අරගෙන එක්ස්පෝර්ට්ස් කරොත් එහෙම ඒ මුදල් දවස් 90කට ගෑ නැත්නම් ඒකට තියෙනවා තමුසි දඩයක් වෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒ වගේ ක්‍රමවේදයක් අපිට ඒක හදා ගන්න වෙනවා. ඉතින් මේක මොකද්ද කියන එක තාම හරියටම අපිට නිශ්චිත කියන්න බෑ. මම හිතන්නේ අපේ එක්ස්චේන්ජ් කන්ට්‍රෝල් ඩිපාර්ට්මන්ට් එකෙන් ඒ ගැන බලාගෙන කොහොමද මේක ප්‍රායෝගික ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න කියන එක. ඒක දැනටම අර ණය ගන්න ඒවට ක්‍රමවේදයක් තියෙනවා. එතකොට මේක ණය නෙවෙයි මේක ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ ආදායම් කියන එකනේ. ඒතකොට ඒකට ඒ දිනක සීමාව තුල ගෙනාවේ නැත්නම් ඒක දැන් නීතිය පනවන නිසා ඒ නීතිය එකිනෙක පේන වයලේෂන් එකක් විදිහට තමයි කන්සිඩර් කරන්නේ. ඒකට එක්ස්චේන්ජ් කන්ට්‍රෝල් විනිමය පාලන නීතියේ යම්කිසි ඒ කියන්නේ මේ ක්‍රියාත්මක නොවන කර්තය වයලේෂන් එකක් කරොත් ඒකට වෙනම කොහොමද ක්‍රියාත්මක කර යුත්තේ කියලා ඒ නීතියම තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒ අනුව කටයුතු කරන්න පුළුවන්.
Dr. Viresa, is it an indication of a extra BOP crisis, the new law?
I don't think so. I mean, this can't be an solution to a crisis. I mean, here thing is that exporters, if they have money, if Sri Lankan residents are keeping money in a bank account here or bank abroad, still those are assets of Sri Lankan residents.
So why suddenly you enforce this kind of law?
I think that, as I said, it's a decision by the Minister of Finance. We are basically implementing the rationale for that. Basically, is to encourage. I mean, that's what I think. That's what the thinking of the Minister of Finance. I mean, you have to ask a question of the Minister of Finance. The thinking, I think, is to make foreign exchange available for local, the banking system, rather than that money available for the, in other banks, like foreign banks. For example, the advantage is that once this foreign currency are available in our banking system, then our banks can utilize that for better intermediate process for local investment. Whereas if the money is kept somewhere else, then those banks, foreign banks, those banks or those countries can use that money. And at the same time, we have relaxed the requirement or restriction that if money comes in, there's no restriction for them to take their money or pay for anything. So by doing that, I don't see that's a major issue for exporters, because it's a matter of whether they keep their money in a local bank account or foreign bank. It doesn't make a big difference as long as there's mobility is there. There's no restriction for the mobility.
Given the
something to that, all over the world, demand is much weaker, and exporters have been struggling, not just in Sri Lanka, everywhere. So this is a measure to try and see that we maximize the earnings from the exports that are performing. You see, that's why it was brought in. Remember, we are facing unusual times in the world economy. Don't forget that. This is a very difficult situation. The global economy, the IMF's forecasts continue. Every time they come out with a new set of forecasts, they are lower, sequentially, from the beginning of last year. So the IMF itself is unsure about what the real growth of the world economy is looking like. We have this big problem of the British leaving the European Union. They are going to vote on that, I think, on the 23rd of June. That is a seismic event. If Britain leaves the EU, it will affect a lot of world trade. Because those are two huge trading blocks, the UK and the EU. Ahead of that uncertainty, a lot of demand amongst consumers in Europe in particular is weakening. That's why the European Central Bank has gone for negative interest rates. We've never seen negative interest rates as far as I can remember. In fact, this is probably one of the few times in history that you have seen this. Not just in the EU, in Sweden, in Japan. I think more than a third of the global GDP is now in countries which are giving negative rates of interest. You actually have to pay banks to keep your money in them. It's the first time we have seen this, in history. So this just shows what a colossal problem we have globally in terms of trying to stimulate people to buy our products. And we are lucky in Sri Lanka. Our exports only fell 5% last year. But nevertheless, we have to try our utmost to see that we maximize that income for our banks and for, the local economy. Because if exporters are going to keep their money in foreign banks abroad, it doesn't help the Sri Lankan economy to perform, no? So that is, I think, the underlying rationale for bringing this measure. Yes, it is unfortunate. It's not a measure that we would have ordinarily liked to do. But the point is you have to look at the whole picture and then, try and respond appropriately. That is
Governor,
what we have done.
do you have any estimation of how much of export earnings are in abroad?
We think it's around 25 to 30% are being kept overseas.
Which means 2-3 billion?
Could be, yeah. Maybe a little, yeah, plus or minus. The point is this, some of that, those earnings are kept abroad for genuine purposes. Now, for instance, the tea exporters have said that they have to give deferred payment terms to induce buyers in Russia or other countries, to buy their tea. So there may be genuine cases there. And there, the government will bend over backwards to try and help them. But in general, when we look at all exporters, if you compare the invoice value and the actual money that is sent back to the banks, there's a gap of about 25 to 30%. So this is why, we feel that we have to try and encourage our exporters to bring more of that money back.
Given the global economic situation, buyers in foreign countries are asking for longer credit periods. So maybe our exporters may not be able to bring this money within 3 months.
It's true. And like I said, the government and the central bank is willing to accommodate such requests. It's not that we have completely shut the door. So we will look at it, like I said, it's an unfortunate situation, but I want you to understand why this was done. It was not something that was done, to try and go back in time and reassert a controlled economy. It's just that the global situation is such that, we have to protect the country's reserves and our banking system and see that we get the maximum benefit.
Governor, since this Bangladesh bank heist, what are the protectionary measures you have taken in terms of cyber security of central bank?
So we are reviewing this constantly. I think you may have seen there was an article yesterday about, a supposed backdoor bot attack on the SWIFT system itself. We are in active consultation with SWIFT, with our counterparties in the New York Fed and, all other central banks to really get to the bottom of what happened. I think details of that are still emerging. But clearly, if a hack attack took place in that SWIFT payment system, that is a worry. And I think a patch has been introduced to address that issue. But I think the key thing is you have to look at very elementary things. For instance, all our servers and PCs that are linked to these payment systems are going to be isolated from any email or internet access. And then you disable all your external drives on your PC. Basic, simple, common sense stuff like that is really the best approach, in my view, to preventing this sort of backdoor attack from taking place.
Does that mean, are you updating? Is the central bank
Of
updating?
course, we have a full-fledged IT department who is constantly looking at these issues and learning every day.
Are you using this SWIFT's Alliance Access software, Governor?
I can't tell you the technical details, but certainly we use SWIFT like most other banks around the world to transact money, to move money around the world.
So what are the special security measures the central bank taking on?
No, so like I said, you have to use your common sense. You have to see that the PCs that you use to effect these SWIFT transactions are as isolated as possible from internet and emails, which is what hackers use, to enter your PC and mount these backdoor attacks. And then, of course, we talk to our cyber security professionals who give us all the firewalls and all other types of devices to prevent this sort of penetration.
I mean, in the history of the central bank, have you come across any kind of issues with the SWIFT in the past?
Not that I'm aware
Or
of.
with your corresponding bank?
But there have been issues, and in fact, we have in the banking community in Sri Lanka, like in other countries, we have all the chief information officers meeting regularly and exchanging information about hack attacks. These happen almost on a daily basis. And all these cybersecurity experts are constantly talking to each other. And at the central bank, we actively participate in those discussions. But for obvious reasons, these are kept very confidential. We don't want everybody to know. But globally, I can tell you, banks on a daily basis are being hacked. People are attempting to hack them. That is the nature of the beast. We have to live with that.
Are you worried about the vulnerability after this issue?
We have to be worried. That's our job, right? I mean, in this interconnected world on the internet, this is part of the landscape. People will always try and, penetrate your systems and mount malicious attacks. But that, it's like war and peace in the real world. You just have to have armed forces out there trying to protect the country. So we just take it as part of our normal course of business, and you need that extra luck, hopefully, that nothing bad will happen to our systems.
Now the GSP Plus facility is not available for countries of upper middle income. Now, according to the annual report, we had $3,925.
Yes.
So next year, if we get a 5.5% increase, that's going to go above the upper middle income. So is there actually a use of us negotiating for a GSP Plus, because we won't be eligible for that next year?
What is the threshold for upper middle income?
4,125.
No, basically, I think the GSP Plus, the availability, I don't think is necessarily based on that kind of a strict definition. That, I mean, if that's the case, the people who negotiate would obviously know that's going to be a situation, no point of negotiating. That kind of classification is applicable more to the World Bank, IMF, institutions like ADB. This is a different institution, European Union, that, if those countries agree to provide that to Sri Lanka or any other country on certain criteria, obviously they should be able to provide it. That's how I understand. That's why the negotiations are going on. If that is not possible, I don't see why the reason there's a negotiation going on, if that is a problem. I don't think there's a strict criteria saying that, okay, if that is above 4,000, you wouldn't be eligible, and only below 4,000 are the guys who get it. I don't think that's the case.
And also remember, in Sri Lanka, the geographic dispersion of income is very skewed. The war-affected areas, or either two war-affected areas and the deep south, are much poorer on a per capita basis than the Western province. And as you know, 45% of GDP comes from the Western province. So one of the arguments is that don't look at Sri Lanka from a macro per capita GDP perspective. Give the war-torn areas and the deep south, some added privileges. So we'll have to, approach it from that perspective. And I think the World Bank and all these agencies who are in Sri Lanka have acknowledged that fact, that, there's a lot of reconstruction to be done in some of the poorer areas, on the peripheral areas of the country. So I think that will also be an argument which donors will and lenders will look at when they consider whether to give us the GSP Plus and such like. I don't think that 4,100 is a line in the sand.
Is our GDP per capita calculated based on nominal exchange rates or real?
Nominal, no. It would be all nominal numbers. So.
But isn't it a more realistic picture to do with real?
No, this GDP per capita calculation is for comparison across countries. So that has to be done in a consistent manner. So that's why all the countries, GDP per capita is measured in the same way. You divide the nominal GDP by the nominal exchange rates. Then there is some component of looking at the real, because that deflates the currency depreciation. So kind of comparison. And other concept is what we call purchasing power parity per capita GDP. That's also different. That if you look at that, we are actually much higher. Purchasing power parity base is basically what you consider as in real terms. That's done by the World Bank. That's for the purpose of comparison and consistency. That computation is done by the World Bank across the countries, and that data is available with a time lag. I think latest available right now as far as I can remember, I think up to 2013 on PPP basis. If you look at PPP basis, we are much higher actually. Than that means in real terms, our GDP is higher than a lot of other countries because the purchasing power means your ability to purchase a basket of goods given your income in real terms.
Governor, once the proposed VAT rate hike is implemented, what kind of an inflation pressure and that could create, and what kind of a contraction in domestic consumption that could have?
I don't think we see a contraction in domestic consumption. The inflation point, I think again, I think the exchange rate is a bigger influence of inflation than the VAT on a like-for-like basis. But on the other hand, I suppose since the VAT will take place in a discrete jump, there could be a short-term impact. But again, like I said, we will keep monetary policy tightening on as a standby control to see that, if inflation does start to misbehave, then we will try and influence the growth of credit, try and reduce it somewhat to see that inflation doesn't continue to be out of kilter. But look, I mean, for the time being, like I said, inflation seems to be coming off in the month of March. Let's see if that trend continues into April. And then it may actually be a good time to raise the VAT, because globally, if anything, we are seeing deflationary trends, where prices are really doing nothing in the Western countries and even in large emerging markets, including in India. You see that inflation is behaving quite well. So I don't think there'll be much of an inflationary impact. Do you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think just to add, so everyone understands government will have to raise taxes, whether it is from VAT or NBT or sales tax. What would be the best way of raising tax revenue without having a minimum impact on inflation? So we all will have to understand. So taxes will have to be raised. Then what is the best instrument to raise that component of taxes? So VAT, if you compare VAT versus NBT or sales tax, turnover tax, VAT is the best instrument which will tax only the value-added component. Whereas if you, for example, if government did not raise VAT, government will have to raise something like NBT by another 2%. So the comparison is whether raising NBT by 2% or raising VAT by 4%, which has a better impact or minimize the impact on inflation. In our calculation, increasing VAT by 4% would have a less inflation impact than raising NBT by 2%, because NBT means every point you add 2% more imports, then intermediate, final, and then consumer level. Then you add 4 in the chain. If there are 4 points in taxes, you add 8%. Whereas here 4% is only on the value-added component. If you work out, obviously both will have impact on inflation. I think minimum impact would be by imposing VAT. That is the reason why VAT has been suggested here.
මට ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. මට දැනගන්න බෑ දැන් ආර්ථික වර්ධන වේගයේ යම්කිසි පසුබෑමක් තියෙනවා අවුරුදු ගණනාවකට සාපේක්ෂව. දැන් මෙතකොට ආයෝජනය වැඩි කරන්න පොලි අනුපාතය යම්කිසි වෙනසකට ලක් කරනවද? බැංකු පොලි අනුපාතය මොනවා හරි වෙන ඉදිරියේදී සැලැස්මක් තියෙනවද අඩු කරන්න හෝ?
බැංකු පොලි අනුපාතය කියන එක අත වශයෙන්ම මේ පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ දැන් මුදල් ප්‍රතිපත්තියේ උපකරණයක් විදිහටනේ. ඒතකොට ඒකෙන් කරන්නේ දැන් මේ ආයෝජන වැඩි කිරීමට පමණක් මුදල් ප්‍රතිපත්ති මේ පොලි අනුපාතය වැඩි කරනවා කියන එක නිවැරදි ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් නෙමෙයි. මුදල් වල පොලි අනුපාතය අඩු කරනවා අපි දකින්න නම් රටේ තියෙන ඉල්ලුම අඩුයි කියලා පේනවා නම් ඒතර පොලි අනුපාතය අඩු කරනවා. ඉල්ලුම වැඩි කියලා පේනවා නම් ඒතර පොලි අනුපාතය අඩු කරනවා. ඒ වගේ දෙපැත්තට වැඩ කරන්නේ. ඉතින් එහෙම ඒ නිසා තමයි අපි මේ සැරේ හරි පහුගිය සැරේ වැඩි කරලා දැන් මේ සැරේ අපි ඒ ගානම තියාගන්න අපි දකිනවා ඉස්සරහට යනකොට මේ තියෙන ඇග්‍රීගේට් ඩිමාන්ඩ් කියන එකට හානියක් වෙන්නේ නැතුව පොලි අනුපාතය මේ තත්ත්වය පවත්වාගෙන යන්න පුළුවන් කියන එක තමයි ඒකෙන් පෙන්වුම් කරන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒකෙදී අත් වශයෙන්ම ආයෝජන වලට බලපාන්නේ අර නාමික පොලි අනුපාතය කියන එක නෙවෙයි මොකද රියල් ඉන්ට්‍රස්ට් රේට්ස් කියන එකේ උද්දමනය සහ පොලි අනුපාතය අතර වෙනස මොකක්ද කියන එක. හැමතිස්සෙම සේවින් අර ඉතිරි කිරීමක් මේ වැඩි කිරීමට හෝ යම් සාධාරණ මට්ටමක ආයෝජන පවත්වා ගැනීමට පොලි අනුපාතය කියන එක තියෙන්න ඕන ඉන්ෆ්ලේෂන් වඩා පොඩ්ඩක් වැඩිපුර. ඒ ආකාරය තමයි ඒක පවත්වාගෙන යන දිගට.
Governor, what sort of measures have you taken with regard to the Panama Leaks incident? Have you identified the person involved in it, and what sort of measures have you so far taken on it?
On these Panama leaks, when I was in USA last week, I actually contacted this International Committee of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ. They are the people who actually initially leaked this information to a German newspaper. And they told me that they are only publishing the documents on their website, I think in May or June. It still hasn't been published officially. So the thing we are facing is, first of all, we have no way of securing that documentation. Thereafter, so what we have read is what we have read in the press. Now, in the Sri Lanka press, some names have been mentioned, but when we cross-check those names, they were not from the Panama Papers. I couldn't find any trace there. I think they have been taken from another document. You see, so we have to be, first of all, very clear where this information lies. And we prefer to get it from an official source, preferably, from one of the investigative agencies in Panama or in the US, something like that. So we have open lines to all these agencies, and we are waiting for those documents to be corroborated. Once we get those documents, then we'll start investigating, researching those documents and looking for any leads. In the meantime, of course, if anything surfaces that is of relevance to Sri Lanka, we will definitely act on that. But so far, I'm sorry to say, we have not got any tangible evidence from the Panama Papers, either in the form of media or wherever it's published, that there are any Sri Lankan names named in those papers.
If it is revealed that Sri Lankans are involved, what sort of measures will you take actually?
Well, then, of course, we cover the exchange control aspect, which is that, if Sri Lankan residents are keeping money overseas, which they have not declared, clearly that is a violation of our laws. But then there's another angle, which is the tax. Have the Sri Lankan nationals who have this money abroad paid tax on those monies, from their income? That is something for the Inland Revenue Department to do. So we will collaborate with them and the Ministry of Finance to, see whether there's a case to be made against these individuals. So that is how we will proceed.
අධිපතිතුමා ප්‍රකාශ කර අර කාසිහා නෝට්ටු නිකුත් කිරීම ගැන. ඒතර දීර්ඝ කාලයක් තිස්සේ තියෙන ගැටලුවක් තමයි මේ කාසිහා නෝට්ටු හිඟය. ඒතර මහා බැංකුවේ සංඛ්‍යාලේඛන අනුව හිඟයක් නැහැ. මේ ප්‍රමාණවත් පරිදි කාසිහා නෝට්ටු නිකුත් කරලා තියෙනවායි කියන එක මහා බැංකුව නිතරම කියනවා. නමුත් ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම මහා පොළොවේ මේ මිනිස්සුන්ට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නයක් තමයි මේ ගියාම රුපියල් විශේෂයෙන් 5 සහ 10 නැහැ. ඒතර ටොපි චොක්ලට් වගේ දේවල් තමයි දෙන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒ සමහර විට අර ළමයි එකතු කරලා කාසි කැටවල සහ ඉන්දියාවේ එහෙම එකතු වෙලා ඇති. ඒ නිසා ඇත්ත ප්‍රශ්නයක් තමයි ඔබතුමාලා කඩේකට ගිහලා කාඩ් එකෙන් නැතුව මුදලින් ගත්තොත් ඉතුරු සල්ලි විශේෂයෙන් 5යි 10යි දෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඉතින් සාමාන්‍ය මිනිස්සු දීර්ඝ කාලයක් තිස්සේ මේ ඒක බස් එකේ ගියත් එහෙමයි ඉතුරු සල්ලි හම්බෙන්නේ නැහැ. හරි අමාරුයි. ඉතින් ඒ නිසා ඇත්ත ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා කාසි හිඟයි කියන එක. දැන් මහ බැංකුවේ ඉෂුව කරපු නම්බර්ස් අනුව කියන්න පුළුවන් ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ කියලා. ඉතින් මම හිතන්නේ මහ
there is a problem. I'm not denying that there's a problem. The issue that we have is that for several years we didn't issue enough coins. That is why you have this shortage now. Now there are 2 or 3 things I want to say. First of all, we checked in Buddha Gaya where there's a lot of coins that have been deposited by our pilgrims. But I found that the value of those coins is not as much as people think it is. And actually the cost of transporting it to Sri Lanka will probably be more expensive than keeping those coins there and printing new ones here. That is one. The second point is this. We have not built up enough stocks of coins in the central bank to distribute. Now, since I became governor last year, we have distributed the maximum amount of coins possible. But there are 2 problems. One is we don't have enough coins, so now we are manufacturing some coins. They are being minted in some of these minting presses in Europe. But the second point is that we don't have enough distribution channels. Now a lot of temples around the country have lots of coins. There's nobody to go and collect those. And the temples themselves, I think they don't have people or transport equipment to take that to the bank. So what we want to do is get the banks to send mobile units. Now mobile banking, for instance, is something that we have to develop in Sri Lanka for various purposes. There are several small villages who don't have access to, say, bank accounts. Now, I'll give you an example. I went to Jaffna a few weeks ago. I met with some, in some small villages where a lot of fishermen live. When they earn money, they spend all their money because they have no bank to go and deposit the cash. So they haven't even started the savings habit. You know, this is another problem. So we want to start mobile banking, you know, have mobile units, vans, properly protected, going around some of these villages and inculcating that savings habit. That is one thing. The flip side of that is we can use those mobile units also to collect all the currency and the coins that has been deposited in you know, in temples, even in the other you know, commercial establishments, and have more circulation of those. But the main thing is, as a central bank, we have not invested enough in producing these coins. As you say, the 5 rupee, the 10 rupee coins, there are insufficient volumes of those. So even if we want to distribute, and we have more than doubled the distribution in the last year, still it's not enough. As you say, still they are giving toffees as change. So we are trying to address that. We are now investing heavily in minting new coins. And at the same time, maybe we can produce a 10 rupee note, which will be more convenient for consumers to carry than coins.
මේ වෙනකොට තිබෙන විදේශ සංචිතවල වටිනාකම ප්‍රමාණය කොච්චරද?
මෙතන අපි අවසාන මේ කරනකොට 6.3 බිලියන් වගේ ප්‍රමාණයක් තමයි gross reserves තිබුණේ. $6.3 billion.
මට දැනගන්න පුළුවන්ද ලංකාවට ලක්ෂ 2කට වඩා වැඩියෙන් monthly කවු හරි ආදායමක් ගේනවා නම් මොන හරි අලුත් නීති මොන හරි හඳුන්වා දීලා තියෙනවද ඒක පෙන්눔 කරන්න ඕනේ කොහොමද ගෙනාවේ නැත්නම් ඒක මොන හරි එකට පොලියක් අය කරන මොන හරි සිද්ධියක් තියෙනවද?
Yeah, then you have to show where you got the money from. That is the basic rule. But if you have an income of 200,000 or so, you don't have to show that. The taxman will want to know where your income comes from. But for bank opening and all that, there is no necessity. Only the first time you open a bank account, you will have to show where that money came from.
Are you going to continue the LTV ratio on vehicles?
Well, yes, to the extent that, you know, we don't want a big surge. Now, I think the last numbers I saw, I think it was for March or for February, showed that again there's a bit of an increase. So clearly, you know, given the weak external environment for our exports, we don't want to see that imports of cars really surge. I mean, we understand that people want to own vehicles and, you know, there's a huge demand for that. But to the extent we can, we want to restrain that demand in the short term until the world economy gets onto a better footing. And then, you know, once our exports start performing normally, then I think, you know, we can remove that those restrictions on LTVs, etc.
Any timeline?
Sorry?
Any timeline on that?
If I knew that answer, you know, I would make a lot of money. Look, I mean, the global economic situation is very, very unusual. You have, on the one hand, unemployment in the United States falling to fairly low levels. You know, unemployment is now below 6%. And yet, inflation is struggling to even creep up to 2%. In Europe, you know, it's almost negative inflation. Same in Japan. So we have a global crisis of demand. And these why central banks are so desperate. They're allowing negative rates of interest so that people will borrow as much as possible to stimulate demand, but that's not working. And this is something we discussed in Washington when we were there last week in the IMF and the World Bank meetings. The solution seems to be that governments have to spend more. But then, you know, governments can't spend much because they already borrowed so much. So how can they borrow more to spend and do this sort of Keynesian lifting up of the economy? So there is a worrying situation that we face globally.
Governor, from your point of view, what was the reason for the budget deficit to expand last year? What were the sort of areas that...
Look, it's no secret that the wage increase for public servants was a key driver of spending in the economy. In fact, capital expenditure was cut to enable wages to rise. But I would argue that actually helped the economy, because on the one hand, demand was weak in Sri Lanka right up to 2014, and you needed some sort of a lift up in terms of domestic demand to counter the weakness on the external side. So I would argue, that was a good counter-cyclical fiscal boost, but on the other hand, the revenue effort did not correspondingly grow to fund that increase in spending. So that really was where the fiscal problem arose, and of course the major problem is that there are these arrears from previous spending which crept into last year's budget, because in the finance ministry they have adopted what you call a cash accounting policy, where you only acknowledge expenditure or revenue if the cash flows in or out. So to that extent, all the spending from 2014 where cash was not actually spent but the work was done, say for the construction of roads and highways and stuff, when the bills came, they had to be paid last year. And this is what pushed up the deficit to 7.4% of GDP. So, how do you fix this? Well, we don't want to cut expenditure because that will slow down the economy and people will be worse off. So we have to now raise revenue, and that's really the focus of this whole IMF program. How do we tax ourselves more efficiently?
Governor, with the fishing ban being lifted now, it comes into legal effect, I guess, only in June or July. Would we be able to, get the same market for fish exports that we had before the ban, or how would we lose out?
I think I'm very optimistic. I think, Sri Lankan fisheries were one of those unusual sectors which benefited from our civil war, because with our Navy patrols and all that, no foreign fishermen came and poached in our waters. If you look at India, they have almost destroyed their marine environment by this bottom trawling and all these types of practices. So in Sri Lanka, we are blessed. Fish actually die of old age in our waters, which is an unusual phenomenon. The point is this: I think the fisheries industry has to manage itself on a sustainable basis. That's going to be the key going forward, because you can see the Indian fishermen are already poaching in our waters, and that has to be stopped. But the next thing then we have to see is that as more tourists come into the country and local demand also picks up, the demand for seafood internally is also going to be very strong. And we have these very rare species like, yellowfin tuna and barramundi and all these types of, highly prized export fish, which will definitely boom in Europe once we resume our exports. But having a sustainable fisheries policy is key. And this is an area of research which the Honourable Minister Amravir is very interested in. I hope we can do more work on that, because when you watch what has happened in India, it's dreadful. I mean, we don't want to go there.
Now the BOI has stopped giving tax concessions, and we have a deficit of hotel rooms. So are we going to face a problem there where investors aren't going to come?
I mean, having worked in the BOI, my feeling is tax incentives are not an important thing. If you can make, good profits and cover your investment in 3 years, which is what they do in the Maldives. And to me, we are today facing a situation like what Maldives was 10 years ago. A lot of investors I know personally who went to the Maldives made their money in 2.5 years, 3 years on their entire investment. That was the level of profit that was generated in those investments. So in Sri Lanka, now, investors are coming in precisely for those type of opportunities. They are not looking for tax holidays. The rate of return is so high, they will come anyway. I'm convinced of that. Okay. There are no more questions. Thank you very much.